Hello, good evening. Welcome to the very first edition of Upfront for the year 2024. Tonight, we will do some projections into the economy of the Republic of Ghana. This is utmost importance because I'm sure many of you will realize that the economy has not been doing well in the last couple of years. The President of the Republic of Ghana is convinced that this is the turnaround year and we have turned the corner. The Finance Minister has been reiterating that too, but what does the reality say? Today, we saw inflation also inch downwards a little bit. Government's hope, that's of course for December 2023. Government's hope is that inflation will by the end of this year get to 15%. Is that realistic? Are the other projections for the economy also realistic? There's no better man than my guest to have this conversation with. He is Professor Stephen Adair. He's been a former GRA board chair. He also been a former NDPC board chair. He's been very, very critical to the economy of the Republic of Ghana. He's an educationist, and I'm sure you know that he's written a lot. Prof, you're welcome to Upfront, and I hope you are doing well.
From my holy village of Shiramasi.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, I wanted to put this in perspective. This is the first time I'm actually hearing you this year. I wanted to know whether you were as optimistic about the economy as the president when he says, this is the year that we have already turned around, so we are going to do better.
Differently. I'm not a politician. And in 2024, we are going to hear a lot of hyperbolic statements from both the government, the positive side, and the opposition on the negative side. I think that compared to 2023, 2024 will be better. But it's quite over-optimistic to say that we have turned around. When even now we don't know the state of the relationship with the external creditors, where they are going to agree to the debt restructuring, which is not going to happen until February, and the rest. So I wouldn't be that optimistic. But everything points to the fact that 2024 should be slightly better than 2023. That's all I can say.
Well, we should be able to explore this further, and those are introductory remarks from Professor Stephen Adair, who is my guest tonight on Upfront, and we'll be looking at the economy of the Republic of Ghana. In fact, I specifically tagged this conversation an outlook into the year 2024, trying to put into perspective and asking the question, will the anchor hold this year? But it's also an election year. Would it be better? Would it be improving? You mentioned, Prof, our current quagmire with the creditors who are yet to give us some clear-cut agreement taking forward for us to even get our second tranche from the IMF. We're hoping to get this some months into the last year, but it didn't materialize as of the time that we wanted it. Are you hopeful that this is going to happen anytime soon? And how is that impacting the economy of the Republic of Ghana?
In negotiations, you cannot be prophetic. So let me not be a prophet and say it's going also to happen. But I think that the fact that Ghana has been able to service its external debt for more than a year will force the donors to come out with some accommodation, because the alternative is that we cannot pay, and that is example we say come with. So
well, I guess I'm having some slight difficulties with Prof's what they call it outputs. We sure should be able to fix that and get back to you after this break.
Okay.
You're welcome back to Upfront. Now, my guest tonight on our conversation about how the economy is going to pan out in the year 2024 is Professor Stephen Adair. I'm sure many of you know that he's ever distinguished economist, he's an educationist, and you would also be very much aware that until recently he was the board chair at the Ghana Revenue Authority too. So he understands virtually everything that happens in our governance in one way or the other. And I'm not sure in the last couple of what they call it decades how many of the finance ministers will not come to him for some wise words. Prof, you're welcome back. I understand that we are in a very perfect situation now. So we're talking about the delay for the disbursement of the second tranche of the IMF support. And this is largely because we are unable to get a good arrangement with the creditors who really were expecting to respond as of the last quarter of the year 2023. My question is, what measures can we take to address the ongoing delay in receiving the second tranche? And also, how is this currently impacting our commitment to economic growth and development?
Well, first of all, I'm sure that the donors themselves, the creditors, are in a dilemma because other countries will take a cue from what happens to Ghana, and especially China, to whom a lot of the African countries owe a lot of money, doesn't want to give in easily. However, Ghana has not been able to service its debt for more than a year now. And I'm expecting that in this first quarter, there will be some accommodation. From the government side, they are saying around February. And I'm expecting that there will be some agreement because the alternative is that Ghana cannot pay. As a champion will say, this one has not been able to pay. So I'm expecting some accommodation in the first quarter. But a lot of things in 2024 will depend upon that. A lot of it will depend upon the rains. A lot of things will depend upon government behavior in an election year. So it is very, very murky to be able to say this is exactly what is going to happen. I think that all things being equal, the projected continuous decline in the interest rates along with inflation coming down, we may or may not achieve the 15%, but definitely there will be a downward trend. If they are able to come to some accommodation in the first quarter, which I expect, the rate of depreciation of the cedi will be within the neighborhood of about 7 to 10%. There's a projection of 13 cedis to a dollar. I'm not too optimistic. It can go as high as 14. But still, given what has happened in the past, that will be a moderation. A lot of Ghanaians misunderstand when they say that inflation has gone down. It doesn't mean things are going to be cheaper. It means the prices as we inherited the year before would have gone up at a lower rate. Those of my economic students will say this is the second differential, DY/DX, is the rate of increase which will reduce, but prices will continue to increase. But generally, the hope is that 2024, despite the usual misbehavior of politicians in election year, will see us a bit better than the year before.
Now, that's an interesting development because I've heard other groups like Fitch, I've heard other groups equally say that we are likely to have better times in 2024, except that you added a caveat that it would largely depend on some other developments on the economy's plate. You talked about our current arrangements on how to deal with the debt arrangements that we currently have and whether or not the IMF deal is going to go as well as if there are going to be other blocks or delays, how that's going to pan out and all the other. The interesting one ahead. Yes, I was coming to the part that you mentioned range. Yeah,
yes, but food,
that sounds like a 1964 projection about how things are supposed to go. I mean, I thought we had moved away from rain-fed agriculture in 2024.
That's the sad part of it, that food accounts for a very big proportion of our inflation. Mm-hmm. And yes, we shouldn't be talking about rain-fed agriculture, but that is the reality. And God forbid, if there's a drought, which I hope not, this year, things will go haywire. And I think that is where we must be realistic when we are talking about economic projections in an economy which is quite fragile. A lot also depends upon the measures that the government will put in place. They were trying to stop the import of some commodities. I hope, and let me say it up front, I hope they will not introduce this import, the chits import regulations and leave it to the Minister for Industry to determine who gets what. That is what started the high rate of Kalabula corruption in the mid-70s during the Champions time. And we cannot allow that to happen again.
No, that's an interesting development. I'll be coming to that, how we can improve our current state. But we're talking about the other factors that would determine whether we have a good year. You are optimistic that inflation is likely to trend downwards. Of course, that doesn't mean that prices are necessarily going to go downwards. Today's indication of inflation from somewhere around 26 to 23 is a good sign that we may be starting on a good point. The difficulty, however, is that the elements of interest rates might not equally be trending downwards like inflation. Why is that so?
Simply, first of all, the government has a high appetite of borrowing the treasury bills. And the government, so if the government does not put its feet down to bring the treasury bill, which is almost now the only window for them to be able to get some money, then definitely, if you're a banker and you don't do anything, you just give your money to my good friend Kenneth Foriata, and that ensures that you get about 25 to 30%. Whom are you going to lend and then chase them for? So a lot will depend upon what happens in the money market, and especially with respect to the treasury bills. And that is why, if nothing happens, the interest rates for the productive sectors, that's the real sector, agriculture, industry, will not come down. But if inflation is able to trend towards 15%, I'm hoping that the treasury bill rates will also go down around 20% or even lower. Then the bankers will be able to do something about the interest rate, because nobody, that's rational behavior. If you don't do anything and you can get a good interest rate, just drinking coffee and just pushing a button and sending the money to the governor to give to the government. So that is what's going to determine whether the interest rate for the real sector and the private sector will go down. Unfortunately, the spread has always been too big. This is the only economy whereby the government pays higher rate than even the private sector. So that's a different ball game altogether.
Now, that's an interesting point. Now, depreciation of the currency. You are thinking that it might do a little bit better. Others have a projection that the currency will still remain quite fragile this year. How is it in your estimation? What should be done to make sure that our currency would actually weather the storm this year?
Well, we are talking about a short one, because is a very short one in economic terms.
Yeah.
In the long run, we'll come back to that one, because I think that my old boss, my first boss in the Ministry of Finance, with your station, have done an excellent think through. You may not agree with all of them, but at least he has put out a lot. But in the short run, your way of holding your currency has to do with, one, controlling imports. We have to, and that's why I'm saying that we have to reduce the things we don't have to import, but not through import licensing, which they were, in this case, if the opposition hadn't put its feet down, they were going to hand it over to K.T. Hammond. Let me tell you, it would have led to a high rate of corruption. We have unprecedented, as the politicians will say it. But we must reduce imports. Second, there must be expenditure control. And this is where the challenge is, whether in an election year, the government will be disciplined enough. And that's where I find they are coming to a conclusion with the IMF and the donors. Then they will put a lane on what the government can do, at least not totally freeze them, but at least reduce the appetite for that. But the bottom line is that we have to increase our revenue generation. And there are many low-hanging ones that we can do. We cannot continue.
I know that you, not long ago, was the board chairman at GRA. So as for revenue generation, it's important to you. But we have a plethora of taxes that is currently in play. Our taxation regime, according to the business people, is a bit retrogressive. Do you agree?
I do agree, because first of all, there are too many of them. And therefore, we are already having personal income tax at 35%. In effect, we are having company tax about 30%. And then the other day, actually, someone showed me, I must say that even though a former GRA chairman, I was shocked that if you imported a vehicle or a good, you have about 17 small taxes that you have to pay, which is incredible. So I think that there's a limit to which you can squeeze water from the rock. But there are certain areas which we are not enforcing. The Ghana's problem is not introduction of more taxes, but enforcing it, stopping the leakages, the exemptions that people are getting, they shouldn't be getting. Going after those with visible income, because you see them in the buildings that they have built. For me, I'm a capitalist and I don't mind anybody building a mansion, but if you build, say, a 10 million house, you have to justify your income, and we must go after them. When I was chairman of GRA, we found out that in 3 years we could increase our income per revenue per GDP from 13.5 to 17.5. And we were on course. The first year, full year, we were able to get 3 billion in excess of what the government had projected. Of course, if you want to do so, you have to step on some toes. And then when you are in your house, you hear that a new board has been put in place, which, in other words, not even the courtesy of saying that, please, it's time for you. You have done 15 months, get away.
Oh, that's what happened to you?
Exactly.
Oh, I never knew that. I mean, that would have sounded like something that does not happen to the likes of Professor Stephen Adair.
Oh, but some of us don't. We serve at the pleasure of the appointed person. So therefore, you just go quietly. But yes, I was actually watching television when the new board was inaugurated.
At the GRA?
Yeah, but that is, don't make a...
No. Because I intended speaking to you about taxation issues. Because currently...
Okay, so let's go to that. So what I'm saying is that the taxes are too many, too little ones. And unfortunately, my good friend said that he was going to abolish nuisance taxes to bring in angry taxes. We need to go streamline our taxation, go after this, stop the corruption in the system, and then make sure that not the few income earners are freeze out, but those, I mean, when you go to, they call it East Legon Hills and other places, the amount of construction is going on is unbelievable despite the haircut. And you are living in a country and that goes on and people are not paying their taxes. Let's stop and go after them. Now there's going to be the cocoa season, they call it, in the elections. You know, people will be going about stuck in their cars, millions of cities. Of course, we've seen some of them on their bed having millions of dollars already. And yet, these people, let them show their taxes. Unless we go after them and increase revenue. So a simple answer is that cut your imports, go for your revenues, reduce some expenditure which are not critical, and then, of course, over time, you can't do it in the short run, increase your exports. These are development economics 101. That means that it's class 1 development economics, not the one you have to be a professor to come to the TV to talk about. It's the question of implementation. and the
No,
boldness, the political will.
that's an interesting development. Now, I want to ask you, Prof. Currently, there are concerns about certain taxes, for example. There is the concern that just today we saw the letter from the grouping, that's the Ministry of Finance, reminding the GRA that they were supposed to have VAT on electricity for what they call it, the lower consumers, not the lower consumers, but for those who are outside the bracket of the lifeline consumers. This is something that we just got to know, which is supposed to start for the beginning of the year. Some are heavily opposed to this right from the beginning because they believe that this is almost like imposing further increase in electricity, but just that it is tax on the electricity that people buy. Is this one of the progressive or retrogressive taxes?
Definitely. I mean, electricity for people is a necessity. And therefore, when you increase it, it will hit many people. Let me say that I'm almost in my home out of the ECG grid. I'm 95% on solar because I saw this coming 2 years ago. And I said, I'm not going to be hit by it. But I think that the idea of increasing taxes, new taxes, rather than implementation and getting those taxes, property taxes, and then paid, should be the norm. And also, we are not getting sufficient from our gold, and now there's an issue about lithium, still going about it as if we are living in the 18th century. So there are certain areas that we should focus. And then the compliance. I think that there's also a lot of corruption within the tax system in this country. I was there for only 15 months, so I can't be an expert in what goes on. But there was a case whereby someone had actually, a company had to pay 100 million or thereabout, I think dollars or cedis, I can't remember correctly, and had gone to get some money and made it 1 million.
Really?
And I find him. Of course, agents don't like it. And there are so many leakages in the system that must be plugged. Again, there was one case whereby that happened to be a state-owned enterprise, had collected what they call it one you pay people, you take it, withholding tax, chopped over 100 million. And our boys went there and wanted to stop them because the GRA has the power, if you don't pay taxes, to come and close your factory.
Yeah.
I get a call, go and tell your boys that they should leave my factory. That's one of the days I was so angry. And I said, Madam, I'm not going to tell my boys to leave there. I don't have even the audacity, the authority to go and tell tax officers going to collect not taxation, but monies that have been collected for the government, and they are chopping to leave. Let them negotiate with the boys. Let them pay some deposit and negotiate with that. Of course, if you do such things, you won't last more than 15 months. But some of us cannot tolerate this, and then they go about trying to blackmail you. And
I see that. Now, what I was talking about is the implementation of the value-added tax on the supply of electricity above lifeline for residential purposes. Now, this is, as some have put it, effectively a 15%.
It will increase the price of electricity, and there's no doubt at all people will be worse off. But actually, in other jurisdictions, when you have a VAT rate, it applies to everything.
Okay.
But the question is, what does it bring the electricity? For example, one of the reasons why our factories are not being competitive is the cost of electricity. And I'm not sure whether this one is going to affect also the productive sectors. If it does, it will become more and more uncompetitive.
Actually, it says up to 22% for commercial users.
So we become uncompetitive because already we are one of the highest costs when it comes to electricity in our sub-region, if not in the world.
Because there are two conversations here. On one hand, we want to increase revenue. On the other side, too, we want to promote businesses and make sure that people do not suffer unnecessarily from a taxation regime which is retrogressive. Which one should be our priority right now?
Listen, you first focus on things that increases production, and then that in turn will feed into your tax system. If you muscle those the ducks that lay the golden egg, you are not going to go anywhere else. And at this moment, I believe that things that increase the cost of production in industry should be avoided. We should be going after the billions of uncollected property taxes and people getting away, clearing things, being exempted, not even the more important ones. These are where the mines have millions of exemptions. And these are the ones we should go rather than going after the ordinary producer and consumer when it comes to electricity.
I am sure, as a distinguished former chair of the GRA, you have heard of this brouhaha surrounding the SML contract to do revenue assurance. I hope you are not the one who signed and contracted SML in the first place.
No. I can tell you clearly the answer is no. Never came to the board for any signature. But I think that the president has done well. It's that he is asking for an independent inquiry into it. From what I've read in the social media, it really could be one of the big time bomb issues which must be looked into. And if people have really done wrong, must be brought to book. But sometimes, you must be very careful when you are speaking about this because you don't have all the facts. But now the tag is who should be the one to do it? Will it be KPMG or it should be the Auditor General? I think that the Occupy Ghana said that it should be the Auditor General. I am inclined to say that probably KPMG will do a better job, but that is my own view about that. But yes, it is something that must be looked into. But once it is under investigation, I shouldn't go further. The first is that my board had nothing to do with it. And that's all that I can say at this stage. And let's await the outcome because you can prejudge when you don't have all the facts.
I get your point. Now, there's another conversation about the operations of the GRA, that the introduction of more recent taxes on betting, taxes on at the ports, taxes in varied forms is actually making businesses in this country uncompetitive. And the thinking is that we are in a hurry to increase our tax to GDP ratio as against the quest to make sure that businesses thrive. If you are advising the president today, mindful of the fact that you understand how businesses operate and also have been at GRA, what would be your best advice to him?
First of all, let me clear one thing. Betting is something, and I must declare my stand. I am personally against betting, and anything that is done because it becomes addictive, it ruins people's life, and it's not a game, it's a destructive activity. So anything that if you tax it out of existence, I will be even happier. So that is my personal one. On your question, I believe that there are, as I've said it over and over again, there are areas when Ghana can reap billions. We are not doing property taxes, getting enough from our natural resources. That's where we should be going. Also, compliance. That is, most of the taxes, they make the law, it's not implemented. Everybody must be wants to be exempted, because he has a connection of the party or is related to some big man. Leave GRA to become professional, give them the target, and let them achieve what they exist, and they will be able to get the 17.5, which we believe we could get it in 3 years without increasing any taxation. That's where we should go. Then it comes, and in so doing, there are some productive sectors we want to encourage. In fact, contrary, there are some areas, for example, when you want to stop all importation of food juices, you should give the Ghanaians freedom for the next 5 years to produce the orange juice, because in the end, producing the orange juice and on the market and being sold in the fast, you will get more. In the short run, you may lose some taxes, but in the long run, you would more than get to outweigh what you will lose. So it requires not just a matter of pick and choose, but you must have a strategic framework, because taxation is a developmental activity. And it's not a matter of, when the budget's there, you list, these are the places we can get money and you go about it. No. What you have to do is that for Ghana to progress, which areas we should encourage, which areas we can tax. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of compliance, not a matter of increasing the level of taxation.
That's interesting. If you just joined us, you're still live on Upfront here. My guest is Professor Stephen Adair. We are projecting into the year 2024 as we just began the year. Our conversation largely is on how many of the important things to you are going to run. We've been talking about the inflation. We've been talking about exchange rate. We'll be having a conversation now about taxation. We walk through the taxes in the country, whether they are progressive or not progressive. And we've also been talking about SML. We'll also be having time about what is really our target going into the future about taxation. Are we going to be able to target the right places? Prof has been giving us some indications as to what should be done. To wrap up the conversation about taxation generally, there are those who say, when we look at the bigger picture in the Republic of Ghana, people are refusing to pay because they don't know what we are using the money for. And that the main conversation should be that the poor governance we have in this country makes it almost impossible for people to believe that their taxes will be used for the right things. True or false?
You in my language, say, "Well, I have money." That's a bad boy. But that is true. I think that there is no one in Ghana who doesn't know that public sector corruption among the politicians and in the public sector is very high. I mean, there is an indication that at least 2/3 of Ghanaians have experienced corruption, being extorted for things which they are doing. And you can go, you take your car and just go by the road. I just came from my village. And you can see that the police at barriers, when they see that somebody is coming, and then they let everybody go for you to pass quickly. But if you watch about half a kilometer before you get there, you see that they have a paper, they put it in, and the rest. That's petty corruption. But we all know there are grand corruption. The estimation is that about 40% of the monies we have spent actually get lost in corrupt deals. That's a huge amount of money. People still quote about 20 years ago, the World Bank estimating about 3 billion lost. That is, it's been there in the public domain for about 10 to 15 years. No, it's much higher. And that is what makes people very, very concerned about whether they are getting value for money. And let me tell you, the amount of money that is being displayed, especially by public office holders, is sometimes sickening. The amount of buildings which are going on, you don't go to the villages, there are no buildings going on. But you go to the so-called rich areas, and it goes with the government of the day. When NDC is in power, it was Chade. The last, they have just, I went there the other day, I couldn't believe how many buildings, huge, expensive ones, were built in the short period of Muhammad's time. Now, it is East Legon. You can almost link every regime to an area. And these things make the ordinary Ghanaian feel that they are being cheated. Because if the money, and especially the borrowed money, is that wasted, and then we have to pay it through haircut, then it becomes almost offensive. So I sympathize with the ordinary Ghanaian, and that is why I believe that we must tackle corruption frontally. And if you want, I will give some ideas, because some people have done so. I can bring them up, and also my own special ones.
I'll come to that, but are we not estimating the level and the impact of corruption wrongly? The President of the Republic of Ghana is quite forthright. At the recent, NACAP review, the President was categorical that he's pumped more money, perhaps than most of the other governments in the Fourth Republic, into anti-corruption institutions. 2, he has not protected people who were involved in or accused of being involved in, i.e., he has not been what people say is the position he has played when it comes to covering corruption. And that when it comes to the fight against corruption, he has evidence to show in the establishment of the OSP. He has evidence to show in funding. He has evidence to show in the personal commitments he has made in this area. Are these not clear-cut indications that if we are properly estimating the quantum and the seriousness or the gravity of corruption, we might see that it is really drastically not being what it used to be, especially under President Akufo-Addo?
I will be the last to say he hadn't made some efforts about the OSP, the funding, and all those things. But for him he cannot say that corruption has abated. What has been the results of the OSP? We are talking about the actual outcome, not just the effort. And if you do the effort in the right direction, for example, so long as you have a law which says the giver of the bribe and the receiver are both criminals, do you think that you will get somebody to report corruption? No. There has to be a look at the fundamental law of the country. Again, the president and me and you know that if you multiply political agents, you multiply corruption in the country. Has he reduced it? The answer is no. So I think that I will give him the credit that in terms of actual visible efforts he has done. Let me tell you, there's one thing that makes me love, Lee Kuan Yew. Do you know that one of his people was accused of taking bribe? The man hanged himself rather than facing Lee Kuan Yew.
I see.
He hanged himself. Why? Because the whole system is such that to be identified with corruption, was an anathema. Can that be said about Ghana? And here I'm not talking about Akufo-Addo as a person. We have not done enough to deal with corruption. In fact, none of all that he's mentioning, the only thing that has made some sectional impact is digitization. The areas where digitization has been successful, that of, say, the issue of passport, again, DVLA, there are still deals there. But corruption in DVLA, in the passport, has gone down drastically. We cannot say that it is true with GRA. We can't say that it is true with contracting systems. We can't say that those people who are now going about just for the parliamentary candidacy of NPP, going with bales of money, are going with earned money. No, please. We are not saying that he hasn't done anything, but when we are dealing with the cracks of corruption, it has not been tackled.
Now, as you speak about those who are going around with money, I've seen the story, I'm not sure if you have heard it, that the OSP is going after the National Entrepreneurship and Investment CEO for allegedly sharing some money to delegates in the run-up to the MPP's parliamentary primaries. This is evidence that the OSP is working. This is evidence that President Akufo-Addo's proposals are working in one way or the other. You agree. But what do you think about how much money we are spending in our primaries anyway?
Well, let me tell you, I was talking with someone who is participating in this, and this is not unique to NPP, except that when you are in power, they seem to have more access to their own money. I asked somebody, you people, you are giving an average of 2,000 cedis to a delegate. He says, oh, Cobra, some are giving 5,000. This is inside information.
That's interesting.
And if the average candidates are about 500, 500 means 2.5 million, more than probably twice the earning of the MP within the 4 years. Why would anybody, me quite go and pay 2.5 million when if I put it in treasury bills at just 25%? Hey, yo, I'm getting about how many? About 800,000 per annum. Let me tell you, we have a big problem on our hand. Our political system, and here it's not an MPP specific.
Okay.
Unless we do something about it, our democracy will just be monocracy. And people are going to be in parliament not because of their gumption or what they have for us, but because they had money. And unfortunately, 80%, if not more, of the so-called delegates, you go to your village and see the delegates there, they will sell their mother for 1,000.
Now, that's an interesting point, but I was asking whether you think that the OSP has done well going after those purportedly involved in sharing money to delegates.
You know, the English have something that one swine, or one swallow, that it does not make a summer. I think that the OSP has even come out that he's frustrated.
Yeah.
And that his impact has been limited. So don't come and ask Stephen Ade. Go and ask the OSP.
No, I'm talking about in the very instance of having to arrest or seeking to arrest somebody who is seeking to bribe or seeking to influence delegates. I'm asking whether this is a step in the right direction.
So that is very good, but that's going to, what I'm saying is that it's 1 out of 200 or 1 out of 180. And let me tell you, sometimes when somebody is picked upon, it's just for other reasons rather than sharing the money, because other than that, we know that all the constituencies, they are sharing the money. Why is he the one alone being picked? If they want to teach you, then they focus on you.
Oh, that's an interesting point anyway. But it means we cannot get rid of monocracy in our politics. What can we do differently?
Look, what we need to do, and I think that in the sense, do I see Osingami's picture there, my big brother?
No.
Anyway, I think it is him. By the way, I think that I say that the academia and the middle class have let so much go under the water. We must stand up. Listen, I just came from my district. During the last election, Katie Hammond gave everybody who could identify that he voted for him 1,000 Ghana cedis, and then when you come out of it and you could show the photograph, then you get a 40-inch television. Now they are saying that their television has collapsed, so you should come and repair them. And this is widespread. And I think that there's a need for the silent minority, especially in academia and the middle class, to stand up and say, yamma, about just how many people go to parliament. 275 and those who contested. We won't allow them to ruin our country. And you allow only few people, and then you get the politically aligned radio stations insult you and everything else, and malign you and say all sorts of things. There's now a need for a Ghana first big group of people who would think through. And there are a few things. The laws that permit this must go. The idea, in fact, that, let me put it this way. Most of Ghanaians think that they choose their president. You don't choose your president. You have about 250,000 NPP. Let me give the same number in NDC. Out of that, 80% are unemployed, people hungry, or just the so-called delegates. All the 5 or so that will come from my village to go and decide whether Katie Hammond or somebody else virtually are unemployed. They decide who the presidential candidates are, and then you choose between them. We need to stand up and have a total overhaul of our system. And it starts with talking about it, having the right fora, mobilizing people, and telling the Ghanaians that they are being shortchanged by this monocracy. And I believe that we can do something. As people say, do something before you die. Or Singami, do something before you die. Let's come together on both sides. Don't get ourselves pigeonholed into this group, that group, that group. No. I believe in my book on Ghanaian leadership, I said only 200 people, when they stand up and they want to stop this madness, we can do so. Let's start now.
I'm told that I have very limited time left on my hands. There's a question, though, that I need to ask you about education. The grouping who are teaching in the various schools, NAT, NAGRAT, and Co., they are asking that the feeding of students, which they think has become problematic recently, be reverted, and the purchasing, the process of getting food for the young people in our senior high schools should be reversed and be controlled by the head teachers instead of what is currently at play. Do you support such a decision?
Well, I don't think that I can pontificate on something I haven't studied. But I have 1,700 students I feed every day, 3 times a day. It's not centralized. And they get all without any harubalu. The more you So I can talk generically. The more you centralize things, as we do in Ghana by the politicians, the more corruption and inefficiencies you introduce. I don't see why somebody in Accra should tell a headmaster in Avrongo where to get the food and what. So they must have a good reason, and they must come and justify what the new system is better than the old. But at this moment, I'm concerned with my 1,700 students who are fed well and doing well. But it requires a study. So I hope that the NAGRAD and then the NAT people will come out not with an analysis and show. But I can say generally, in our system, the more you centralize things, which in other jurisdictions you have the bulk advantages, tends to be the opposite. It introduces corruption, party wicks get in there, and of course, when there's a change of government, it's our time also to chop.
Prof, this is the beginning of the year. I'm sure we will continue with subsequent conversations. This is just a teaser of our conversations with Professor Stephen Adair. Prof, I'm grateful to you for your time this evening. Afishapa. Well, folks, that's where we're in today's edition of Upfront. Many thanks to you for joining us.